Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We have with us a well-renowned attorney at law, Mr. Vashist Maharaj. Mr. Maharaj, when we left, you were making the point, and in fact insisted on making the point, that the Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, is the supreme law of the land. And I think what he was trying to illustrate, therefore, it means that the Civil Service Act, which is an act of Parliament, does not trump the Constitution. The Constitution, the supreme law of the land, trumps any other acts of Parliament. Ms. Maharaj, obviously, I want to get into perhaps your views on those who have come out in support of the CPO's decision to give this allowance, this housing allowance to the president of $28,000. Mr. Reynold Cooper, who is the head of the public service, he has come out in defense of the CPO, and he has said that the CPO, the Chief Personnel Officer, has a general power to interpret Ministry of Finance circulars. And I want you to discuss that a little bit so people can perhaps understand. He gives a number of explanations of why he thinks that the act was not unconstitutional of giving the allowance. But he says that the CPO has a general power to interpret the Ministry of Finance circulars.
The short answer to the question you're asking, you have no difficulty now understanding why the civil service is in such chaos in this country. When you have a person who is the head of the civil service saying that we have the power to interpret, and by interpreting, he is abrogating onto himself either a power to veto, to alter, to change what the Ministry of Finance says. That is not interpretation. I understand that they are driven by information conveyed in the form of circulars, which they must carry into effect. And in order to carry it into effect, you must read, understand, and execute. That is not what we refer to in statutory interpretation as interpretation. It is no different. He has no judicial capacity to sit and construe and construct a circular from the Ministry of Finance and defeat the purpose. In this case, he is wrong on several points because the circular he is referring to is that of the Salary Reviews Commission, which has nothing to do with his department, which has nothing to do with his jurisdiction. So he's outside of the ambit of the statute which creates his portfolio. And not only is he outside, he is abrogating onto himself a judicial capacity which he does not have at all.
What is quite interesting is the CPO, and in fact, it is a female lady. The CPO, nowhere in the Civil Service Act states or makes reference to any sort of general power for the CPO to interpret.
Exactly.
And I mean, you go to the Act. So I don't know where he fished that one out from. I thought perhaps in your experience over 20 years as an attorney, you probably could shed some light. He also goes on to say in defense of why the CPO had the power to give this $28,000 housing allowance, he goes on to say the CPO, the Chief Personnel Officer, is the secretary to the Salaries Review Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, as we continue, please, if we can put the numbers up, if we can kindly put the numbers up and you can give us a call. It's 665-6278. If you would like to weigh in on this debate, if you have any opinions, any suggestions, any contribution, please feel free to do so. Yes, Mr. Maharaj. So the second thing Mr. Reynold Cooper is saying is that the CPO is the secretary to the Salaries Review Commission.
You know, Mickela, one thing that you said, one of the things that you said in your introduction that really hit very hard on my mind was when you spoke about accountability. One of the most difficult things we have dealing with is accountability in a post-colonial society. That's one of the biggest things we have. From two perspectives, we do not feel as ordinary citizens in this country. And that is why I must compliment you, because through your program, you try to empower the powerless in this society by understanding that you can question people in government and question people in office.
Absolutely, yes.
And this is one of the situations where when you question, you get answers that are nonsensical. They are circular. I have the power. What does that mean? I am an absolute despot. Whatever I say or do is the final word on everything. More importantly, I was making the point earlier on a matter of statutory interpretation, which is a legitimate realm of interpreting. Section 141(1) tends to suggest that the office holders that come within the responsibility of the Statutory Reviews Commission is mutually exclusive from those that come within the civil service. So that there's no way that you can interpret 141 or the Constitution as giving the Salary Reviews Commission any responsibility with which the civil service. The converse is equally true. There is nothing in 141 that gives the chief personnel officer any responsibility with respect to this office, because it hits on one fundamental principle on which the Constitution is founded, that there should be a separation between the elected officials and the appointed officials. So this flies in the face of all basic concepts of constitutional propriety. Absolutely. How can you now say, listen, the Constitution, we can circumvent it by manipulating the Salary Reviews Commission? This is in effect what he's saying. The Salary Reviews Commission gave a report, either a house or housing allowance. We, however, can interpret it to say or means both.
Or means both. Yes. Exactly, exactly. But what was quite interesting, ladies and gentlemen, and we're no way or form criticizing or taking a stance. We are using the words of, at this previously, the head of the public service. But I want to say, not only did the head of the public service weigh in, finally we heard the government speak. It did take a wee bit of time, but nonetheless, the government's position, and then we have also heard from the Attorney General, and I will go into what he has said, but I want to spend a little bit of time in allowing Mr. Maharaj to explain. The government's position is this chief personnel officer acted alone.
Oh my. Somebody seems to be hanging out the chief personnel officer to dry.
And that is very worrisome. That is very worrisome. Before we go there, I believe that we have a call. Good evening, caller.
Yes, good evening, Ms. Panday.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, I want to take this opportunity, like I did before, to commend you in the way you are leading this discourse. The way you are leading this discourse gives us ordinary citizens a clearer understanding of the matters relating to the Constitution and the law.
Thank you, sir.
And you have done that so well with the matter you prosecuted Mr. Kublal Singh. I'm saying that all credit to you, because this evening I'm following the program and I'm getting very clear in my mind. I'm not a student of law, but I'm very clear in my mind as a citizen. The way you are leading this discourse is presenting to us some facts that we need to understand and know. And thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And that's what
I think that caller stole my point. I was making the point, and I think we both thinking alike. I really must compliment you, and I can't say it enough. You are taking the effort to empower the powerless in the society by your program, by breaking the taboos that constitutional issues are alien to the average citizen of this country.
And it doesn't affect. And thank you so much, dear caller. Thank you so much for that call. I wanted you to just, again, please give us your opinion. The government says the CPO, the Chief Personnel Officer, has acted alone.
Let's go back. And interestingly, you focused on the word review in section 141(1), right?
Yes.
Let's look at what happens before the word president. And I'll read the sentence. The Salary Reviews Commission shall from time to time, with the approval of the president, review the salaries and other conditions. So without the sanction of the president, the Salary Reviews Commission cannot commence its job of review. The president must initiate. He must approve the review. If he does not approve it, the review cannot commence.
Correct.
All right? Why is that so? It is that way because you cannot review the president's salary during his term to his detriment. Okay? So there is a built-in constitutional protection to ensure that a hostile government does not decide they're going to pay the president $0.
Correct.
If the CPO is under the control or controls the president's salary, there is the potential, in this case it went up. If we don't like the president, we could pay him $0. CPO interpret the legislation and give some perverse interpretation like the one they're giving now and alters the terms and conditions of the president during his tenure to his detriment. That is why the Constitution is structured in a way to prevent that abuse. The CPO has no business in Section 141(1) salaries.
I did find for myself, ladies and gentlemen, when the government said that the CPO acted alone, I found it quite fishy, especially seeing that the Civil Service Act itself states that the CPO is subject to ministerial discretion on many, many matters. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that we've got another call on the line. Good evening, caller. Good evening, dear.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm calling from Mickela.
Hello, sir.
I listened to your comments, you, Mickela, and Mr. Maharaj, and I am standing here as a patriot of our country. And I'm looking at the situation with the president. Now, this is the man who has to swear in the Integrity Commission. This is the man who's overlooking everything that runs in our country. Yet, he allows this to go along with him unsaid, unexplained, or even not stopped. Right now, I could give you a little example. If a person who is collecting old age pension from Trinidad and Tobago dies, and for some reason, 1 month after his death, a person goes to collect it on his behalf, they are in very much big trouble. How come now is the president receiving this money and also being in a residence and nothing has been done? Is he above the law? This is a question that I would like to be answered, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. I will just... Mr. Maharaj, please make a comment. Thank you very much, caller. In fact, we have another caller, so perhaps if we could just take them one at a time. Caller, good evening. Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am worried to know that we have constitutional reform, and we have a senior counsel who is the prime minister, is making a statement according to what is being said about the constitution, the CPO power, and the president power. How could a senior counsel make such a pronouncement on the salary of the president? She need her senior counsel status that that certificate or honor, whatever it is, should be taken away because she is not acting according to what that dictates. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, caller, of course I understand. Thank you so much for your call and your contribution. I think perhaps that was more of a statement than a question. If we could return to the first question. And I believe we have another call. Get your pen writing. Yeah. Good evening, caller.
Good evening, Ms. Maharaj. I have a simple question for you. Permit me to ask this simple question. The Salary Reviews Commission, doesn't the executive have to approve this? And after the approval, isn't it the CPO probably is acting on something which was approved by the executive? That is my question.
Well, I think
could you answer that for me, please?
Sure. Thank you.
The answer lays in 141(2). After the Salary Reviews Commission does its report in 141, yes, the chain of custody and how that is taken into sanction is clearly spelled out in 141.2. And this is what it says, and I will read this for the caller. The report of the Salary Reviews Commission concerning any review of salaries or other conditions of service or both shall be submitted to the President, who shall forward a copy thereof to the Prime Minister for presentation to the Cabinet and for laying as soon as possible thereafter on the table of each house. How does the caller now infuse into that clear line of demarcation between the review and making it into rules, the Chief Personnel Officer?
I think that's why the caller, and quite legitimately so, I think that is why the caller, if the CPO, the Chief Personnel Officer, who has no jurisdiction, nothing, at least within the Civil Service Act and or the Constitution, over the Salaries Review Commission, but yet that is the person granting the allowance, that is the person speaking, of course the caller is going to be confused. The caller is going to think, well, how did this happen? Where did this CPO... And you understand?
I take your point that there is a body of learning out there, a body of thinking out there that seems to suggest that the CPO has jurisdiction. Let me make my position abundantly clear. I can find no legal sanction for that.
And that's really
I think that point has to be brought out very, very completely.
I think that's very important, caller, because caller, also what you have to remember and what we've been talking about almost over a year now, the Constitution, the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, it is the supreme law of the land. It sets out the composition, the function, the role of the SRC, the Salaries Review Commission, and not once is the CPO even mentioned. And that is what I wanted to. Please, we cannot forget our first caller. Our caller had mentioned and would like an answer
about the policeman.
Yes.
Who died, and his wife, who now has to meet all his funeral expenses and maintain her salary, goes and cashes his check. And we are going to say, listen, the lady is in dire need, so she is entitled to break the law. That is not a defense open to her.
Correct.
Why? And I take his point. Why should that be a defense open to the president?
Absolutely, absolutely. I wanted to touch on, I believe we have another caller. We don't have another caller. I want to talk and ask your opinion about the comments that were made by the Attorney General. On Monday, the Attorney General was making quite a bit of noise, actually, regarding the government's involvement after quite some time before actually not saying anything at all. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to quote what he has said. And I quote, "The president is not a civil servant. And this means the terms and conditions for the office are subject to the CPO's jurisdiction." Now, ladies and gentlemen, because it is quite a long statement, I'm going to take it in pieces. Mr. Maharaj, that almost, to me, sounds like a foreign language. None of it makes sense. And I want to reread it, so perhaps you can enlighten me and the viewers, because I didn't grasp it at all. The president is not a civil servant, and this means the terms and conditions for the office are subject to the CPO's jurisdiction. I don't understand it, Mr. Maharaj, only because, as we said,
it does not make sense.
It doesn't make sense. Because the CPO, the chief
has
person,
jurisdiction
only over
the
public servants.
Civil servants.
Civil
So he's
servants.
saying that this is a non-civil servant over which the CPO has jurisdiction. The question he does not answer, where then does the jurisdiction come from? I want to make a further point.
Sure, absolutely, please.
And it gets lost from time to time. And I think it's important that we make this point in light of Section 141.2. The Attorney General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, most Westminster-style system, he sits and holds more than one position. We see him as a member of cabinet. We also see him as the chief law officer of the state. And that is an important function in addition to him being a cabinet minister. He is also the custodian of the public good. And when public monies have been abused in this matter, one would think that the person who would ensure compliance with the rules and law is the Honorable Attorney General, as either in his capacity as Chief Legal Officer of the state or in his capacity as the custodian of the public good. I got the impression that this statement here, he is imbalanced, and what he's looking at is his role as a cabinet minister. Because if you look at 141.2, it says, the Prime Minister shall present the cabinet for laying as soon as possible in the House. If the House passes it, who ensures that the regulations and rules of the House is obeyed? It must be the Attorney General, not in his capacity as a cabinet minister, but in his capacity as the Chief Legal Officer of the state. So that the first part of that statement seems to be a waffling.
Little bit so, which is why my poor dear last caller is absolutely confused. I want to continue. Further, he says, this was dealt with by the Salaries Review Commission. That is an independent body, and the CPO, the Chief Personnel Officer, functions as its secretary. And in doing so, she is not performing a function that any minister has any control of. She functions as an independent officer of the SRC, the Salaries Review Commission. Ladies and gentlemen,
where in the 141.1 does the CPO function as an officer of the salary reviews? I know you read it perfectly.
Please
before.
go right ahead so that we can bring clarity.
Section 140, sorry. There shall be a salary reviews commission which shall consist of a chairman and 4 other members, all of whom shall be appointed by the president after consultation with the prime minister and the leader of the opposition. The chief personnel officer is not one of those persons.
It's not one of those persons. And I find it a little bit frightening, ladies and gentlemen, because we do actually have a valid constitution, albeit it does need to be reformed, it does need to be updated. But while it exists, it is the supreme law of the land. And it seems at this stage to be completely being disregarded. Mr. Maharaj, speak to us a little bit more.
Look at what subsection 140.1.2.
Yes.
Members of the Salary Reviews Commission shall hold office in accordance with section 126. 126 says a person who is a member of the House of Representatives or hold or is acting in a public office is not qualified to hold office of the member of a service commission.
Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, your constitution, our constitution is saying, the constitution, the highest law of the land, is saying that the CPO, an office created by the Civil Service Act, they are simply saying cannot qualify even to be a member of the SRC. And I find that terribly frightening. I don't know if it is perhaps, I want to just talk a little bit, is it that the Attorney General is trying to distance perhaps the government from this by saying the CPO is an independent body? Because the capacity of the CPO as Chief Personnel Officer of Public Servants means, of course, that, and we know that the CPO reports to the Minister of Finance on financial matters and to the Minister of Public Administration on matters of policy. Yes. So is it that by literally pulling out of the air and say the CPO is an independent body, the government or the Attorney General is trying to distance the government? Is that what's happening? And therefore, in that attempt, disregarding the supreme law of our land?
Well, I think he invites conjecture as to what he is doing and why he is doing it, because clearly on a literal reading of the sections, it's difficult to reconcile his statements with the obvious words of the Constitution. So that it invites conjecture why the obvious words are lost on him. But the important point we must come back to is why are there all these rules? Is it because somebody had nothing to do and they decided they will sit down and write a set of rules? The point is not that. That is not the reason. The rules are there with respect to salaries and the separation of salaries between certain officers